Namaste and welcome back. We continue our series Evenings with Sraddhalu. Namaste.
Namaste. Happy to be with all of you.
We are happy to continue today part 6 on the current affairs, and we will be exploring the actors who are disrupting the globalist agenda. As usually, you may post your questions in the chat box on our YouTube channel, or you may send beforehand your questions at our email ID, integralstudies.in@gmail.com. I will start with two questions that are related on the money power. Niyama. My question is about the financial system. It seems one of the ways that the Asura is able to control and enslave, devalue, and plunder the life energy of people is by use of printed money that has been created by fiat and serves the interests of those closest to the money printer, the military, central bankers, IMF, and governments. Since the advent of the dollar as the true fiat currency in 1971 in the US, there has been no limit to the money that the government can invest in expensive foreign worth and military might, all the while devaluing the purchasing power of the dollar for its people and for the rest of the world, seeing as the dollar is the world reserve currency. The economics at play, Keynesian economics, are the brainchild of a known eugenist, atheist, and pedophile, John Maynard Keynes, who had an openly stated agenda to unobtrusively permeate the more flexible minds of young people with his idea and corrupt morals. His influence seems to have taken root strongly in most governments and academic institutions around the world. The economist Manmohan Singh, then the Prime Minister of India, spoke strongly in favor of Keynesian financial stimulus at the 2008 G20 Washington Summit. How can such clearly perverted minds have such a wide and broad influence in society? What can be done to counter such a dark influence which causes such much suffering?
Okay, I think I'll first answer this, then we'll go to the second question. Okay, so Niam has asked this question. It's a bit longish, but Niam has as if summarized much of what we've been discussing financially, although we did not look at the finance to this extent in this detail. What Niam says is that there is this capacity now that the dollar is made a fiat currency. That means you just have a paper attached to a number and that's it. There is no real, let's say, gold backing it since 1971. So there's no limit to the money that the government can print for whatever purposes. And because the dollar is made the reserve currency for the world, and we saw why, and we saw the connection with the oil industry on this, the result is when they print the dollars, effectively there is inflation at a global level. And so it's as if you're taxing the entire world to keep the dollar strong. And that is an interesting structure. And all of this economics is tied to this Keynesian economics, as it's called, John Maynard Keynes, who Niam points out was eugenicist. That means he believed that you have to control the quality of genetics in the birth of people, and you can't just allow everybody to procreate. Only the best genes should survive. And this was a strong belief at that time. Many had it. He was also an atheist, so he saw everything in terms of just profit motives and human greed, and a pedophile also, with very clearly stated agenda to permeate the young flexible minds with his ideas, and so on. And this has, all of this will make sense now that we have had those discussions over the last few sessions. But this line of thinking is very strong today. And so the question which Niam asks is, how can such perverted minds have such a wide and broad influence in society? What can be done to counter such a dark influence, and which is causing so much suffering? So, in a way, we have been answering this question going back the last 5 sessions, how it is that people with such, let's say, twisted minds have come into positions of such influence, such power, and literally dictating global terms. The industry working framework of economics is built around these few individuals and their ideas. So we have understood that going back. So I would just want to put this in context. But one of the important observations that Niam makes also is this, that once you have a fiat currency, you can print as much as you want, but someone else is paying for the cost. Whenever a government prints paper money, it is a kind of a tax which is put on all those who use that money, because suddenly the value of work and the quantum of money don't match. And it's as if the government has taken away from you the value of the work. That's inflation. But in this case, it's a global currency because of oil, and therefore it has a global effect. We can go to the next question.
Money. After listening to Sraddhalu's talk, money, how it works and why it doesn't, I have gained a much greater appreciation of money as a power of the Divine Mother. It helped me overcome a certain disregard I had for money. I understand better now the importance of being a good custodian of her power, and also how it is the vital that we claim her power and not leave it in the hands of hostile and Arthuric forces. Since then, I have been trying to educate myself around the financial system and how best to earn, spend, and save what is hers. I have been looking at Bitcoins as a store of value, and it looks promising as it is currently decentralized and censorship resistant. I wonder if this new technology is a gift of the mother, a tool to help us evolve and also combat the hostile takeover of the financial system. I understand that already there are many spin-off cryptocurrencies that are the scam, and also that Bitcoin itself will be under considerable attack as the fiat system comes under more pressure. And without a shift in consciousness, Bitcoin itself may fall prey to corruption, yet it might be a technological help to claim back the mother's power. Could Bitcoin, if used wisely, be a tool of financial freedom and decentralization, a way for us to emancipate ourselves from financial hostile control, and be a step towards that sweet mother envisioned in her statement about Orville, a dream, in parentheses. For in this ideal place, money would no longer be the sovereign lord. Individual worth would have a far greater importance than that of material wealth and social standing. Their work would not be a way to earn one's living, but a way to express oneself and to develop one's capacities and possibilities while being of service to the community as a whole, which for its own part would provide for each individual's subsistence and sphere of action by the mother. Generally, banks require collateral, and this gives them entitlement. I wonder if this is appropriate, both materially and energetically. Did Mother have any counsel on borrowing and debt in general?
So it's a long question, and looking at many aspects of the question. But I would also encourage those who have not seen the talk, Money, Power, How It Works and Why It Does Not, to do look at that, because it gives you a background to understand the underlying power behind what we call wealth. And the person who asked the question, his name is Mani, M-A-N-I, and asks about this, and he says, is Bitcoin going to be something which could help in this transition to free it from the grip of the perverse powers? Yes, it can. It will be one of the tools, but it can, I don't know if it can ever be the only or the primary mechanism for symbolically representing money power. Very likely, the future of money is going to be digital. There's no way we can avoid that. Increasingly, it will get dematerialized, and this is inevitable. But then there is potential for misuse, and Bitcoin prevents that through a decentralized process. It has many advantages. So it will certainly be one of the major tools. I suppose the way it is presently structured, it will last for a very long time. But there is also a potential for the same technologies to be misused, as you can see today, the bulk of the Bitcoin transactions are all in the illegal trade markets. They deal with illegal products bought and sold and so on. We'll come back to both of these questions in some detail shortly, but I'm just laying the foundation with a few observations on the question itself. So yes, Mani is right that without a shift in consciousness, Bitcoin also will be open to misuse, etc. But then his question, he links it to Orwell and the mother's dream that in this ideal place, money would not be the sovereign lord, individual worth would have a far greater importance, etc. This particular text from which you have quoted of the mother, which is called A Dream, in fact was not originally written for Orwell. She wrote of it before she even formed the ashram. And then she said at the end of that when she formed the ashram, it was to try to realize this dream. And so the actual text ends with the last paragraph that says, and so when I formed the Sri Aurobindo ashram, it was with this intention that I formed it. Later, when she formed Auroville, the same text was taken, that last paragraph referring to the ashram was removed, and the text was used for Auroville. So we have to see this in its larger context, that the ashram and Auroville both ideally are intended to become these communities that live on the spiritual foundations, but again as prototypes, as focal points for something that humanity has to become eventually. So if you take this as a dream for humanity, then you see how far she is looking ahead, that in this ideal world now, money would no longer be sovereign lord, and individual worth would have far greater importance than that of material wealth and social standing and so on. And we can see how things could go in that direction, or even on some level at very decentralized individual and small collectives, things are already heading in that direction. And then finally he asks whether when banks lend, asking for collateral which gives them a control and entitlement, is this appropriate materially and energetically, and whether mother had any counsel on borrowing and debt in general. Yes, I believe so. And I do not recall at this point, I can't give you an exact quotation, but it's the impression I've grown with from childhood. So it's certainly a part of the community consciousness that the mother generally discouraged borrowing and debt in general, that one should be able to build on wealth which is rotated and built up on its own strength. And where necessary, of course, when you need to, you can follow the pattern for borrowing and debt, etc. And in which case automatically you come under some kind of control of the people from whom you borrow. And certainly for a business, especially when a business goes through expansion, this is almost inevitable. But I've also seen across the world very successful and large businesses which were never built on borrowed money. This too is possible. It takes a little longer to build the level of, let's say, volume of the rotation of wealth. It takes a little longer, but certainly it tends to stay on more stable ground. But this is the disadvantage. You can't scale easily. On the other hand, when you borrow and scale rapidly, you have also the potential of collapse. And the bank itself, because it often lends money it does not have, it creates these cycles of a bubble and then a bust. When the banks give out lots of money, it creates bubbles everywhere. Because at some point, the bank has to then get back with interest. And we discussed that earlier. So sometimes it's a tenfold increase. So if they've given out X amount, then there is 10X that they have to take back. And the moment they start that suction process, all these bubbles begin to break up. So typically in a bank lending system, and especially when people borrow without sufficient capability of value, then you have these cycles of bubbles which burst, and it goes through multiple cycles. The banks always remain immune to this. But this is the nature of the economy as it is currently structured, but one can conceive of a situation and structures, forms of economy where this need not happen. So I've given very general responses to both, but now I want to go into a more specific response combining both questions. And both relate to the correct use of wealth and money and taking it back from the current misuse, which we have been discussing for the last 5 sessions. So we saw how the entire financial system of the world, power systems of the world, etc., they have all been media and so on, political systems, all have been corrupted and held by a corrupt few at the highest levels. So in a sense, you see there is a requirement for those who represent a deeper or a higher consciousness to now seize this power, seize this wealth, and bring it back under different higher spiritual values. And Sri Aurobindo spoke of this. You will find this in this little booklet, which is perhaps well known to most of you, called The Mother. And there he writes, and I'm going to read, this is from chapter 4. Money is the visible sign of a universal force. And this force in its manifestation on earth works on the vital and physical planes and is indispensable to the fullness of the outer life. You cannot do without the money. You do need it, or rather the force behind it. You do need it. It is indispensable to the fullness of outer life. Without that force, the life will not have the fullness. It will tend to be restricted or even barren. So, in its origin and its true action, it belongs to the divine. But like other powers of the divine, it is delegated here, and in the ignorance of the lower nature can be usurped for the uses of the ego or held by asuric influences and perverted to their purpose. And so this is what has happened going back a few thousand years. And Sri Aurobindo comments on this. This is indeed one of the 3 forces, power, wealth, sex, that have the strongest attraction for the human ego and the asura, and are most generally misheld and misused by those who retain them. So what happens to people? The seekers or keepers of wealth are more often possessed rather than its possessors. Few escape entirely a certain distorting influence, stamped upon it by its long seizure and perversion by the asura. So, because for let's say a few thousand years, these forces have been held by the asura and seized and perverted, the moment you try to possess or become a possessor, there is a distorting influence from that prior seizure by the asura. There's a distorting influence on you. Can you escape that? And this is a very extraordinary statement. If you go into the language, Sri Aurobindo says, few escape entirely a certain distorting influence stamped on it. Few escape entirely. Now in the English language, a few means a few. But when you say few, it means none. So effectively what he's saying is, none escapes entirely a certain distorting influence. So you may escape broadly, you may escape enormously, but a certain influence, distorting influence, you cannot entirely escape. And even if you are very well prepared, that influence does come upon you. Of course you can mitigate it, you can eventually outgrow it, but initially you do face it. And then he says, for this reason, most spiritual disciplines insist on a complete self-control, detachment and renunciation of all bondage to wealth and of all personal and egoistic desire for its possession. Now, this works within the ascetic mentality. But then what happens? Some even put a ban on money and riches and proclaim poverty and barrenness of life as the only spiritual condition. To which Sri Aurobindo says, but this is an error. It leaves the power in the hands of the hostile forces. So what should be done? To reconquer it for the divine, to whom it belongs, and use it divinely for the divine life is the supramental way for the sadhaka. And then he gives the conditions for how you actually wield this power and for the divine's use. You must neither turn from with an ascetic shrinking from the money power, the means it gives and the objects it brings, nor cherish a rajasic attachment to them or a spirit of enslaving self-indulgence in their gratifications. Regard wealth simply as a power to be won back for the mother and placed at her service. All wealth belongs to the divine, and those who hold it are trustees, not possessors. Think of it this way: whatever money is in your bank account, in your pocket, in your wallet, even if it's a digital wallet, belongs to the divine, and you're a trustee, not a possessor. And you, as a trustee, you're meant to use it rightly, even for yourself, even for your family, for your business, for humanity, well, whatever the scope may be. And it's right to use it for yourself, but as a trustee. So the whole value system is different. Now, having said all this, we look at the real question. This phrase Sri Aurobindo uses, to reconquer it for the divine, meaning at one point it belonged to the divine. It has been usurped by the anti-divine forces. Why? And his view is very simple: because we let it away. During the ascetic phase, which was across the world for, let's say, 2000 years, you gave it up. You left it behind, saying, this is corrupting influence. We don't want it. We look down upon it. And the asura says, thank you very much. Very kind of you to give it all to me, and takes it away. And the same with the power. And the same with this aspect of sex. So, wealth, power. So, power, wealth and sex, these have the strongest attraction for the human ego and the asura, and are most generally misheld and misused by those who retain them. Now, this being the background, and to reconquer, obviously now this question is asked to the mother: how do you reconquer, and what happens with this whole question? And there's some very interesting discussions about this. So, when his mother was asked, how can one know if one's way of using money is in accordance with the divine will? So in brief, she says, first you must know what is divine will. Then only you can know if it is aligned to that. And then she speaks of how one is attached because you have the wealth, you are attached to the benefits which come with it. And the right attitude is this detachment, equality, but then she says, in answer to the question, if one has the power to acquire a lot of money, does this mean that one has a certain control over terrestrial forces? Because she has explained that money power itself is this money is power from the vital world, and it is behind the physical representation of it. And there's a long discussion around that on a different date. She says that when one thinks of money, one thinks of banknotes, coins, or some kind of wealth, some precious things. But this is the physical expression of a force which may be handled by the vital, and which, when possessed and controlled, almost automatically brings along these material expressions of money. And that is a kind of power. A power of attracting certain very material vibrations, which has a capacity for utilization that increases its strength. This is like the action of a physical exercise. It increases its strength through utilization. So she says, for example, if you have control over this force, she describes the color. Well, when it is made to move, to circulate, its strength increases. It's not something one can accumulate and keep without using. It is a force which must always be circulated. And those who have misers who accumulate and keep, they lose it, she says. But then, the true method of being in the stream of this money power is precisely what is written here, a sense of absolute impersonality. The feeling that it is not something you possess or which belongs to you, but that it is a force you can handle and direct where it ought to go in order to do the most useful work. So she says, When somebody who has no physical means, who is not in those material circumstances where he could materially handle money, if he is in possession of this force, he can make it act, make it circulate, and if ever he finds it necessary, receives from it as much power as he needs without there being externally any sign or any reason why the money should come to him. He may be in conditions which are absolutely the very opposite of those of usual wealth, yet can handle this force and always have at his disposal all the wealth that's necessary to carry on his work. Now, with this background, we look at this question. If one has the power to acquire a lot of money, does it mean one has this control over those forces? Mother says, this depends on how one acquires it. If you get it by foul ways, that does not mean you have a control. But if someone scrupulously doing his duty sees that money comes to him, it is evidently because he exercises a control over these forces. There are people who have a power of attracting money and they haven't the least need to practice dishonesty to get it. Others, even to get a few pennies, must make all sorts of contrivances, more or less clean. So, one cannot say, we see a rich man and think he must be exercising a control over the forces of money. No, not necessarily. But if a man remains perfectly honest and does what he thinks is his duty without caring to acquire money, and yet money comes to him, evidently he has a certain affinity with those forces. And then someone asks, but when you make so much money, aren't you impoverishing others? That's what you see in the stock market. She says, is this true? Someone asks, is this true? Her reply, this is not quite correct. If one produces something instead of an impoverishment, it is an enrichment. Simply, one puts into circulation in the world something else having a value equivalent to that of money. This is how you enrich. But if you just take an exchange as you play on the stock market, then you're of course impoverishing someone else in the process. So I skip that part of the discussion. So we come to this thing very important now. This capacity exists, not even in everyone, but we can all develop it in principle. So what would be the right use? And there is a very interesting line I want to read from this. She says, someone asks, why has money power left the divine? She says, no, it's not left it. Money power belongs to a world which was created deformed. And so all the time, always it was under control of the Asuric forces. And what must be done is precisely to reconquer it from the Asuric forces. That is why in the past, all those who wanted to do yoga or follow a discipline used to say that one should not touch money. But the whole universe, in all its manifestation, is the divine himself, and so belongs entirely to him. And it is on this ground that Sri Aurobindo says that the money forces belong to the divine. One must reconquer them and give them to him. They have been under the influence of the Asuric forces. One must win them back in order to put them at the disposal of the divine so that he may be able to use them for his work of transformations. And so this is the part which is extremely important. And in a sense, all of us, consciously or unconsciously, have an opportunity to participate. If you can do it consciously, well, you can do so much more. Not all of us may have the same kind of, let's say, grip on the money power, but to whatever extent you have, you can make use of it consciously. So, one who is, again I read from the mother, one who is capable of attracting this and using it for something good, to increase the welfare of this world, the welfare and well-being of this world, that man has a hold on the money power, that is to say, the force that is behind money. So she has put it in the context of welfare of the world. Of course, it can include your welfare, but I've brought all this part of the discussion for a reason. And linking it to what we have been discussing the last few sessions, we understand that there is a battle ongoing even on this level of wealth, which has to be reconquered from those who currently control it. And in a sense, this has started. There are many good examples. And many of the disruptors that I spoke of last time, and now I'll link it to our discussion, are in fact those who have this capacity, to some extent at least, or are surrounded by people who have this capacity. And so last time I mentioned the first of the 5 names, or maybe a few more that I might share later. The first of the names which I mentioned was Elon Musk. And I want to put him in the context of this discussion now. You see, you look back at his journey, and it's fascinating to see how, yes, he comes from a family which had some wealth, relatively. He goes through a very difficult childhood, times when he has no money, they have no money even to eat food. He goes through a reasonably good education because there's a money power backing him. But then after that, he leaves the education halfway, starts his company. It's a startup. He doesn't have too much money. And there he builds something which did not exist before. You see, the whole mentality is idealistic. He creates the first entirely online bank in the whole world, which then later it was called X.com. It combined with another company and then eventually became PayPal. It was no more a bank, but it was a transfer exchange company, let's say. When he sells that, he makes a reasonably good profit over it. So he actually went through 2 stages. He made one company, Zip2.com, sold that, made $10 million. Invested that now in what became later from X.com to PayPal. When he sold that, he made $100 million in 3 years. Now, going from practically nothing, he makes $10 million within 2 years. From $10 million, he makes $100 million within 3 years. Now, this is not normal. This is somebody who has the vital power, a grip on the money power, is able to seize it. But all the time, everything he's doing at each step is idealistic, visionary, breaking new ground, doing things which have never been done before. And when he makes the money from PayPal with his $100 million, now he could have retired. You can look at 1,000 people who have $100 million. What have they done with it? Most of them invest it somewhere just to maintain the value. Invest in the stock market, they play the market to increase wealth or not, or whatever. Or spend it in various ways, short-term benefits. This man again goes back to idealistic breakthrough technologies, companies, creating new value. Each time creating value of things which did not exist before. And I already mentioned some of the ones before, which include, by the way, SpaceX, Neuralink, AI, Starlink, Twitter now. But one which I didn't mention, which was perhaps the single most important, was his Tesla motor company. There also it was started by somebody, 2004, I believe. He comes in after that, takes over, becomes the largest shareholder, at which point he's not sitting there making money. He takes over the company, becomes its CEO, he becomes the visionary, he becomes the engineer in charge, and literally builds technologies which did not exist before. That's what made Tesla Motor Company one of the most valuable companies in the world. So I'm showing you a pattern here of a man, totally extraordinary. And you see him doing a series of things, each time building wealth and real value of wealth. Now, he could have easily invested in a motor company, made a better petrol car. No, he's going idealistically into electric cars because that's the future which he sees, and he wants to realize that future. And he comes under severe attack from all the existing car companies, from the petroleum companies, from the oil cartels, because they don't want the electric car. You must understand the real story behind the electric car, which I think we mentioned in one of the discussions earlier with Narad, but I will just summarize. Up to the year 1912, all cars were electric. It was the most natural, the most obvious, the least polluting way forward. Everyone knew it. It was around the year 1912. It's also interestingly the time when the Federal Bank, etc. were created, the Titanic sinks, and it's, again, things we have discussed before. You remember I mentioned many of these things and I said, we'll all come back to these things later. So I would highly recommend for you to review the previous sessions and look at all these numbers, and then you'll get this big picture, spanning across countries, across the world, and across 100 years at least, maybe more than 100 years. So around 2012, that's when all these things are happening. The cartels are coming in. They're seizing control of the energy systems. They're creating these new banks which are building debt on the US. Till then, nobody has really paid income tax. Now they're compelling the whole country to live on money seized through income tax and so on. And all this is happening all over. The cartel is taking control. The cabal is coming in a big way. The globalization process is in full swing. The First World War is just about to begin. It's around that time also that they seize upon the electric car and destroy it, replacing it with the petroleum cars. Around the year 1995, I believe, 94, 95, General Motors creates an electric car as a test to see how people would respond, because there was a pressure, there was a demand, and they were trying to see, can we meet this demand in a way that we don't compromise the benefit or the control that is there through the petroleum industry. So they put out, I don't remember, about 100 cars or so, and they made sure they didn't sell it. They gave it to you on rent, so that at any point they decide they could pull it back and say, we own it. You never owned it. You were only renting it. There's a very interesting documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car? Do look at it. I've put these two links on the description of today's session. One is about the life of Elon Musk, again from Wikipedia, and the other is about this documentary, Who Killed the Electric Car? Now, what is important to recognize, the electric car is the most revolutionary step for a reason. And that is because this is what happened when General Motors put out this electric car as a test. First of all, the total number of moving parts in the electric car are about 1/100th. So in a normal petroleum car, you have about 2000 moving parts. Electric car is about 20 moving parts. Of course, you can add more, but this is essentially what is required. They do not experience high heat, so they last much longer. And they don't have any complex kinds of engines. Literally, the electric motor is what you have. You can fit the motor directly in the wheel. You do not even need complex transmission gear. The entire car becomes enormously light, enormously cheaper, enormously longer lasting. And the best part, when you come home, if you have a solar panel and you plug it into your car, you have your free energy. So what happens if just now, overnight, everybody started using electric cars? The petroleum industry would crash. Of course, it is still needed for many other reasons, including the creation of plastics and other high-intensity industries which need petroleum to get high power. But for the home cars, especially for those of us who don't have to travel too far, let's say within a distance of 100 kilometers or 80 miles, you do not need much. You charge, or you have a battery system to charge during the day, and then at night you transfer it to your car. And you can basically live your life with zero expenditure on petrol. Now, this is scary to the industry. And this was the reason why General Motors at some point pulled out the car. When it was so successful, they got scared, they pulled it out and killed it. And you must look at the documentary for the full story. So that was in the 1990s. Brief attempt looking at the future. Now again, putting it in context of Orwell, the mother in 1970, let's say, 69, says Orwell will have electric cars only. She's looking at the future and saying this is how it is. And people who come from outside, well, they can leave behind their cars and transfer to the electric cars, and inside Orwell, zero pollution, effectively free electricity if you do it right. And your cars will last a very, very, very long time because of all the advantages we spoke. So when they killed it, who is there left in the whole world who can actually say, no, but we need to make this future true, realize it? And the man who steps forward is Elon Musk. You may say that the car industry itself, the Tesla Motors was started by two others. But they were basically about to sink. They were about to go bankrupt when Elon Musk steps in, takes over the company, and builds the level of success that it is today. It is one of the most valued companies in the whole world today. The journey itself is painful because they do everything possible through the control of media, through the control of stock market, through actually attempting to sabotage the production of the cars, giving it maximum publicity when there was a problem or an accident, to try to kill the idea, to create fear in people's minds about the Tesla car. And they put people inside the factory to sabotage the cars, to sabotage the batteries so that there would be battery fires and so on. Now, all of this is available in the media if you look it up. Elon Musk is fighting a battle against all this and is managing not only to push out, regain the full, I will say, loyalty of all his workers, throwing out anybody who did not have the loyalty to this vision, and making major breakthroughs in the technology itself, not only in the batteries, not only in the motors, design of the cars, control systems. And it's the only car today which actually has software updates taking place online through the internet. Not only that, when he first brought it out, he gave you free electricity for charging the car by setting up these solar stations all over on the east coast of the US, and you could basically run your life with zero electricity. Of course, the cars were very expensive, it covered the cost of all this. That's not the point. The point is he was already actualizing a vision of the future and getting people familiar with that future which has to be by experiencing it. And this is amazing. So, with all this, you see again the track record, he's building wealth on new breakthrough technologies which didn't exist, always idealistic. And is able to draw the wealth, build the technology, and successfully bring it to this level. The kind of harassment, I'm sorry, I'm not competent to go into the technical details, but I've been watching over the years. They even tried to short his stock. That means to kill the company, they will create a negative story, sell the stock massively at low price, everybody panics and everybody sells, and overnight the company is bankrupt or bought out by somebody else who suppresses it or takes it off track. So when they were massively shorting the stock, he played a game. He actually put out a message saying, I'm going to buy up the stock at this higher price because we just got so much more money infusion, because people were not, the regular lenders were not investing in his company. And he puts that out, immediately the stock rises, and those who tried to short it went into massive losses. But for doing this, he was attacked by the Securities and Exchanges Commission, and they tried to throw him out of the company for protecting it. Interesting. And eventually he stepped down from the position of chairman, so that he could continue on a technical level, but he was no more chairman, someone else had that control. But all this is to say he has fought a really interesting, very difficult battle, very complex battle across years to bring it to this point. And I've mentioned perhaps here Stephen Greer, who told me this, that he was about to buy one of the most breakthrough technologies for batteries, which would have tripled the duration at which one single charge would take the car. And at that point it was an online bidding. An anonymous person comes, buys it up for a much higher price and kills the patent. And Elon Musk is left to fend for himself and, well, find a different battery technology or create his own. But now that patent is locked. So there are many things which have been happening. But all this is to say that you see a pattern here of trying to manifest the future with the capacity to actually build wealth. And that's why this whole discussion that the mother had about reconquering wealth. And I will say in the global sphere, among the few that we know actually represent a positive evolutionary force for building wealth, he will stand out among the most important. And I would challenge you to find anybody else who has done as much good for humanity with wealth creation. What I mean by good is literally realizing the future in his lifetime and making that future available. They may have done good in other ways, but in conventional methods, conventional technologies, conventional resources which represent the past or at best the present. But for one who actualizes the future, it's extremely difficult. The energy required, the intelligence required, the ability to wield power and the wealth power, it needs a tremendously strong, vital and a thorough goodness within, that you are not seized by the power and taken off track. To this day, he still speaks about this. He says, I want to go to Mars, I want to establish a colony on Mars to save humanity, and it's all about saving humanity, for the future of humanity, and so on. And he's actually doing it. He could have, just think about it, having made his 10 million or having made his 100 million, he could have just invested in existing companies. With the intelligence he had, he would have played the stock market and amplified it, like so many others. He did not need to risk it to go into these risky, futuristic, impossible, difficult technologies and then actualize those technologies. So there's a vision, there's a commitment, there's an idealism and a tremendous power to realize. That kind of power you do not see. I tell you, after all the people I know who are available on the public scene that I can see, I don't find somebody with this capability that he has. Yes, there are others who wield power, but not to realize and to manifest a future. So this is something I wanted to express and give as an example, and use this as a further step to the discussion that we have been following. Why is this so important? Why is his electric car so important? It's not just, okay, that's how the future is going to be, we are going to realize it. I'm going to give an angle to it, which is perhaps not obvious. See, at some point, we are going to replace the petroleum industry. Petroleum will always be there. It's needed for plastics. And there are other ways also to do, but you will need some form of petroleum. But we're going to have to replace our energy dependence on petroleum by other methods of energy. Solar energy is not good enough for concentrated high power. Wind energy is nowhere near except for a few isolated islands. And we'll be discussing all this when we discuss climate change later. Nuclear power is only so capable, but the side effects of it and the damage and the necessity of the uranium mining and the waste handling and other dangers which are on the subtle physical level, where the radiation goes well beyond the reactor, goes a far greater distance on a subtle physical level, killing life basically. All of these are not long-term solutions. The only solution long-term is what we have referred to earlier as free energy. And do look up the discussion we had earlier with Narad on this topic, where we discussed the free energy machines and what the mother foresaw also. And I've said that I've actually seen one of these machines. It was not in operation when I saw it. But the mother said the little box about this size will power your whole house. And how does it work? Well, it works by pulsating electromagnetic fields in resonance and creating two counter opposing electromagnetic fields that pumps the current. The principle of it is very simple, very much part of conventional physics. It's just how the coils are designed and how they are pulsed and operated which makes it possible. For those of you who are interested, I would highly recommend, and I will put that link here also on the description, the website called aboveunity.com, which is an Australian-based website where somebody called Chris Sykes has actually developed the whole technology itself, as well as the explaining the science behind, and gives you a pathway to be able to replicate it. But all this is to say that eventually this is going to be. It's a question of time. It was already done by Tesla going back more than 100 years, but it had to be suppressed. Subsequently, many others have developed, rediscovered, refined these technologies. We have all the demonstrations available, but always suppressed. So the question I had always asked myself, looking back at the way people have been harassed, some of them have been just killed outright to suppress the technologies. How does one get the technology out there? You will say, put it on the internet. No, it does not work because the internet is controlled and you can block links, you can delete websites, you can hack into anything. How do you put it out there without getting either killed or getting the technology itself somehow blocked and suppressed? And the one thing which was obvious was, even if you put, let's say, designs and drawings out there and the internet is shut down, you have to have an alternative internet, which is not controlled, through which it could be distributed. So there are strategies for doing that. You could, for example, take a package, encode it with a password, put it out there. After a few million people have downloaded, you release the password, and then everyone has it. There are ways to do that. But what I find today in Elon Musk's effort is this Starlink internet, which does exactly that. It bypasses the cabal-controlled internet, which even if they shut down, you will always have this availability. You cut out all the electrical lines, you cut out all the fiber optic cables, and you'll still have the satellite linked internet. And this is first point. Second is, you may have the electricity production, but where is your car which you can use? How do you use the electricity? Well, Elon Musk has provided the car also. Now, once you have the electric car and the Starlink internet, with these two in place, overnight the knowledge, the information, the technology can be put out, replicated and plugged in, and overnight the lifestyle can change. This is the potential of the work that he has done. I'm not saying it's going to happen this way. I'm just saying that because of this infrastructure being in place, this becomes possible. Otherwise, any effort to make available free energy would be opposed, and it would be suppressed in so many different ways before you could even realize what's been happening. And even if you had it, then, well, where do you get your electric car? You can't. So what he has done is, by putting out the electric cars all over, and I'm still waiting for this, the industry has just begun in India, and it'll pick up very quickly in a few years. So let's say in a few years we have lots of electric cars, lots of electric scooters everywhere. The battery is the problem now. It's extremely inefficient, poisonous, degrading to the environment, etc. Overnight, this technology is released, and let's say you create it in your own home, in your little garage maybe, plug it into your car, replacing the battery effectively, and that's it. Overnight, the world has changed. It'll be as disruptive as the first appearance of the mobile phone and the smartphone, let's say. And it's a question of time. But the infrastructure is in place for this purpose. So this is another example I want to bring to what Elon Musk has been able to achieve. The future is electric. The only problem of going electric now is that if your electricity shuts down, you're stuck. So you need to have a backup. Even for your electric cooking, you need a gas backup or some other system to back up, because you don't know if the electricity could be reliable. So, in this, effectively, what Elon Musk has done, and this is his perhaps biggest contribution, is he has participated in this whole movement of reconquering money power for the divine, for human evolution. Now, he may not have an overtly spiritual side. I don't know. I think none of us would know, because all we have is the criticisms that the media gives us of him. Maybe he has, maybe he's not conscious of it. Maybe he's just attuned and aligned to some idealism that comes in the mind, which is a reflection of a higher spiritual vision, intuition. Doesn't matter. What matters is, effectively, he has been an agent for this reconquest of the money power. And as a result, you'll find the attack that he faces in the mainstream media all the time. Even to the extent that when the US President Biden held a public discussion praising the electric companies, the electric cars in the US and the companies which were manufacturing, he mentioned General Motors and others, all of whom came in after Tesla became so successful that they could not but have to meet the competition. The US President did not mention Tesla's name, did not mention Tesla Motors. Isn't that strange? It's as if the cabal is upset. It's angry that it's been forced to meet this challenge. But of course, they drag the technology. You will see all these other companies which have come in do not have 100% electric cars. They have what they call hybrid cars. So you have petroleum and you have electricity. It costs twice as much, because effectively you have now two motors, electric as well as petroleum, or linked to it with a more complex mechanism, costing so much more, but you stay bound to petroleum. Electricity is there, you feel good about having protected the environment, leave it at that. If Elon Musk was not there, this is all you would have ever got. Because he's there, they're forced actually to catch up. China is going to see another breakthrough, because once Elon Musk opened his factories there, the Chinese government is very canny. What they do is they monitor the technologies, train people in the factories, and then take them out and build their own companies which take over the technology. That's happening now. It's on the brink in China. There's a company which will come up with the same technology now replicated, and you will see suddenly in China electric cars all over, much cheaper, of course. So we are on the cusp of a major revolution entirely due to Elon Musk. And it's not even about the money he put in. It's about everything else that he brought in with the money. The vision, the technology, the engineering, the intelligence, and the ability to manage all these people and get them going under very demanding and pressing, challenging deadlines, and getting the result out there, despite all the opposition, despite the huge battle that he has had to face. So this is, just look at the questions in the chat box. Maureen is asking, talent has been trained and is put in a position to compete for the benefit of hidden hands and hidden design. No one's going to take this easy for the key players. Yes, Musk is an artful player. His game never was to retire with wealth. Yes, true. But you see, it's not just that. He comes with the vision and the capability. And this is what we need. In the spiritual domain, with people who have a spiritual, let's say, background and idealism, we need these two things. To build that competence, power, and the capacity to wield, and then take a vision and bring it all the way down to execution, to perfection, and break through boundaries. That's what the mother was asking for all the time. First in the ashram and then in Auroville. She said, we are not here to repeat what others have done. They're already doing it. We are here to attempt to do what they cannot even conceive as possible. That's the extent of the vision that she demanded. And she did not mind if there was failure in the process of the efforts. These are steps to capacity, to growth. But this is the standard she left us, and for a long time the ashram was like that. In its early years, Auroville was like that. Right now, I think both have, so to say, lost that idealism and enthusiasm or the vision and are stuck in grooves which unfortunately are not quite what she would have wanted. But if we are loyal to the mother's vision, each one of us has to begin in our little space, look ahead and start working. But it means also building our capacity. I want to then come to one more point which link to what we have been saying. You see, in all that I have said, and especially now when I take names such as Musk, and I will take a few more names now, you will always find some reaction. Because for most of us, we have been fed on the mainstream media. And as I said before, there is the MK Ultra programming that we are trained by kind of a post-hypnotic suggestion to associate certain names with a negative reaction. And we have to be very careful to consciously undo that programming. It's the reason why I've taken a long time over several sessions before I begin to name names. These are trigger words. They're post-hypnotic trigger words. You need to free yourself from the programming to be able to understand as well as to see clearly. If in all these discussions you feel this reaction towards the name Elon Musk, you feel you have to somehow decry him and say no, 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 well, recognize that resistance is coming from all that you've been fed, the negative programming associated with that name. Any strong reaction of emotions or any visceral reaction you find coming up in you when these names are spoken or when these facts are given, be sure these are activations of the trigger activations of the programming. And deliberately hold back your reaction, especially the emotional reactions. Shift yourself to the reasoning mind, recognize these are non-reasoning reactions. Observe and review dispassionately the facts and the actions. I'm not saying Elon Musk is a wonderful person. I'm not saying he's a spiritual person. I'm not saying he can be a polite, wonderful, happy friend that you can admire for his goodness. I'm not saying any of that. I'm showing you actions and the results of the actions and the idealism behind those actions. That's all. These are facts. These are objective. And whatever one may feel emotionally, if you look at this, you'll find the emotions, negative emotions, are not justified. And if you can eliminate those negative emotions, dissolve them, and look at the facts in themselves, you'll have admiration and perhaps even gratitude because of what has been achieved just by one man. But if you find these reactions, again, review dispassionately and separate your like or dislike of the person. If you really want to understand the world situation, really want to see clearly, full clarity, you need this deep equality. And only then you can face things for what they are. I'm also setting a very large global canvas across a very large span of time, so showing a lot of interconnections. It's a complex picture. So it needs time to internalize, to see the full scope of these connections and interdependencies. So I would highly recommend, for those who really want to go deep into this understanding, review from the beginning, the first 5 sessions and this being the 6th. Review them, and now having come up to here, when you go back and review, a lot of things will make much more sense and you'll begin to see these patterns. What is interesting is once you're awake and you're conscious of this, you will see news items, you will see propaganda patterns, you'll say, ah yes, this is it, now I recognize this pattern. You can no more unsee. And this is the beauty of it. But in the beginning you have to overcome this programming and reaction. So as I expected also last time, there were some reactions from a few people. I don't take it personally, but I'm just pointing out how the programming works. And you should also not take it personally, just recognize how the programming works. So one of the users made certain comments, for example, in the chat box, and then there were other comments in the comments of the video itself. So somebody says, no, I don't think Neuralink is going to work. On what basis do you not think it is going to work? It's an emotional reaction. The rationale for it is rock solid, isn't it? Not only that, it's been demonstrated. You can find any number of videos today on people who have had sight restored using a chip implant. There's a very crude level of sight. In the beginning, it was 16 dots which would be lit up. And with a chip implant, the person could see 16 dots. And by flashing those dots, you could create patterns to the person's sight center. That's it. Today you have chip implants which link a prosthetic arm to your brain, enough that a person can actually move fingers and lift a glass. The technology already exists. So I don't think Neuralink is going to work. On what basis? No, it's just a gut emotional reaction. Recognize that. Another comment, Elon is just the son of a rich father who managed to create some business, although he doesn't seem evil. What's the problem? Why are you jealous? Why are you upset? No, that's the programming trigger in you. I can show you 1,000 sons of rich fathers. Show me one more who has this kind of vision, you will not find any. So you have to admire it. But why this reaction? And you have to see it's not you. Dissociate from the reaction. Observe that it's triggered from the programming. That's what the programming in the media told you. Oh, he's just a spoiled brat, spoiled kid, rich man. No, he's not. There's something much more. And you should be able to see it despite the programming. Again, someone comments, Starlink is not unique, it's not Elon's tech. No, it is unique. There is no other private, independent, satellite-based internet. China now wants to put up to match Starlink. There is none other like Starlink. Yes, there are a few military satellites. But again, in numbers, a few dozen. Starlink represents, I think, 10,000 or 20,000 satellites, small size, to be replaced continuously, even as they degrade. There is nothing like that. It's not his technology, the person says. It doesn't have to be his. It's created by people. It's like saying the mobile phone is not technology created by so-and-so who was owner of the company. It's created by the engineer who created the chip. Yes, perhaps, but it's irrelevant. The point is there was a visioning mind who saw the vision and got people together to put it together. None of whom could have done it on their own. He made it happen. Without him, it wouldn't have happened. And then again comment, yes, he has been on the side of light. He is not really spiritual, nor intuitive, nor even subliminal. Does it matter? I can show you 100 people who are spiritual, intuitive, subliminal, whatever that means, who have done nothing good for the world other than give lectures. In terms of action, zero. So here's a man who's doing what they should have been doing. And maybe on what basis can you see he has nothing spiritual? And I'm saying openly, I don't know if he has anything spiritual. But what I will say, this vision that he has for the future and the ability to persist and not go off track and to keep the reference of what's good for humanity and defend human freedom does not come without some deep spiritual foundation. Whether he is conscious of it or not is irrelevant again. This is what we saw in Steve Jobs also. He had a very deep spiritual side. He never spoke about it. He was a Spartan, almost like a Zen monk. Very likely that was one of his past reincarnation, his reincarnation of a Zen monk. And he lived with that standard. But what he did was an attempt to realize an ideal. But still, it was not for humanity. It was, here's a beautiful product, and it stopped with that. Elon Musk is looking for humanity, to save humanity, for the building the future, and so on. And again, a reaction. Twitter will not change the world. Okay, I didn't say it will change the world. I said it's the first platform today, owned originally by big tech, which has been freed from censorship. We need that. There is one more platform, which is Gab, and another which is called 8kun. 8kun is so full of junk because it's like a free-for-all, and you have a lot of junk, pornography, and all kinds of trash. It's sickening to go there. Gab is good, but you find people making abusive comments over each other. You'll find good information, but you have to filter through a lot of junk. Twitter is still relatively clean. And what is interesting is, if someone puts up information that is not correct or is flawed in some way, others can comment and expose, and it comes in as part of the system that you have reader comments clarifying. This is a huge step, and only after Elon Musk took over Twitter that he brought in these elements. And there's much more that he's going to do with it. Remember his first attempt to create this online bank? His goal is to take Twitter, or X now, to that level where it becomes the world's most single media for all interchanges. Link that now to Starlink, independent internet, and suddenly all of us can transfer funds to each other, communicate with each other, have a banking system to borrow or lend or whatever it is, and bypassing the entire cabal's controls. Can you see why the cabal is so angry with him? So there's a lot more that's going to happen. Again, somebody commented, Lalu Yadav is not vegetarian. No, actually, I did not mention it. In that video, he says, I don't eat fish. He says that. So maybe at that time he was not. Doesn't matter. But you see, all these are gut reactions. When you're given information that somehow does not gel with what has come through the media programming, you find this anger or impulse which comes in a strong reaction, as if you have been questioned. Because it's a deep programming. That's how the programming works. It's a kind of, I believe at that time when Trump came to power, there was something called TDS, Trump Derangement Syndrome. I actually saw it happen. I was sitting with a few people. Some of them actually were coming from strong spiritual backgrounds with deep spiritual practices. And then somebody mentioned Trump and asked a question about him. And two of them suddenly went into literally in flames. They burst into flames and started shouting, Trump is a bigot, and a list of words thrown. He is this. I looked at them. I've never seen them behave like that. And when they'd finished the expletives, they were exhausted and smiled, relieved. And that whole pattern was so unusual. It was the trigger of the programming. Ask them, okay, justify each of these words. Probably you cannot. Or if the justification you give would apply to 1,000 people, why do you have this anger and visceral reaction? Maybe you don't dislike him, no problem. You don't have to like him. You don't have to like anybody. But this visceral reaction you have towards nobody else. Why just this one man? Because you don't even know him. It comes from the programming from the media. So I want to bring this to your awareness. Be very careful, because now I will be speaking more names. And some of these will represent trigger words which will awaken something strongly. And so, just to bring to your awareness that there is something like this. Observe in yourself, work on yourself consciously to dissolve these things. There's only one criteria by which we have to assess these things. Actions and the effect of the actions in human evolution or for human evolution does not mean that they do it consciously. Whatever they do, is it going in that direction? You have to ignore emotional associations. You have to stop viewing through the lens of good or bad. You see, the common question people ask, is this person good or bad? You've been taught to think in terms of, is this good or bad? And X, let's take Elon Musk. There'll be people who say, oh, he's bad. There'll be people who will say, oh, he's good. My position would be, I don't care if he is good or bad. Look at his actions, and are those actions helping? And the fact that he freed Twitter, yes, that's helping. The fact that he created electric cars, yes, that's helping. The fact that he created independent internet, yes, that's helping. So I don't have to like the man. I don't even have to think he's good, but I don't have to think he's bad either. I can be neutral on that. Look at the actions. You have to consciously train yourself to do this, not just with him, with everybody else. And especially when you deal with political people, people who have lots of power, lots of wealth, prominently, and especially when they're criticized by the media. What is the highest evolutionary interest? And those who necessarily stand for the evolutionary interest will be violently attacked because they are disrupting the present globalist status quo and its plans. They will be attacked, and the most viciously. I would even go so far as to say, if you find one person who is viciously attacked by everybody equally, ask yourself, what is the person doing right? And then start looking for that. And then you might just find that there's a good reason why he's being attacked. So it'll help when you look at the news today. If you have a background of Sri Aurobindo's ideal of human unity, and especially the warnings he gives for this world state, one world government. If you see all the patterns which he has described of the steps towards building this and what it would do, you begin to notice these today. Notice this happening everywhere. And you see Elon Musk, in everything he does, consistently is disrupting all those agendas. He's pulling away from the one world state towards something which is decentralized, more, I will use the word federal framework, which is what Sri Aurobindo suggests as the emergence for independent countries and so on. So if you see, for example, when the war started in Ukraine, the first thing, he gifted several thousand of his satellite links for the people of Ukraine. Obviously, knowing full well the government would likely seize it. Okay. But explicitly not for war. So when the government put those Starlink receivers onto drones to try to bomb Crimea, well, there was a geofencing he had put, luckily, and the bombs could not reach Crimea. So what happened? The mainstream media attacked Elon Musk, saying, what is Elon Musk's connection for Russia? Because he prevented the bombing of Crimea. No, he did not prevent, he did not shut down. He had never activated for the Starlink to work in Crimea, that's all. And he had said that in the beginning, it was part of the understanding when the terms of usage, that it would be used only in Ukraine for the people, to be able to have communications for education, for well-being, not for military use. So the mainstream media deliberately attacked him with false accusations. And this is going to happen. It's going to be inevitable. But we have to look through consciously, look behind, do your homework, don't get stuck with appearances. Okay. So again, I look at a few questions in the chat box. So Revati says, I observed recently in the paper that on the platform X, headlines have been stripped from news articles, and this has irked the media houses. Yes, so what happens when, for example, you read a news item, you often are first biased by the headline itself. And if the headline starts with a negative tone, you may read the entire article and it can get slanted. Or often you stop halfway. And so there are many games happening. And on X itself, on Twitter, there are ways in which these games are being neutralized. Turbanless says that when I see through the propaganda, it makes me angry and it's not good for my sadhana. How do I manage this? So as a first step, you will feel anger. Because you realize that you have been fooled for decades. You will feel anger. It's natural. Oh, I trusted them. You deceived me. Then after that, you have to take the next step. You say, all right, why did this happen? Well, I trusted you blindly. I didn't do my homework. I didn't question. So rather than getting angry, you realize, okay, you need to change your perspective. Sometimes you will get angry because of the extent of the falsehood, the misrepresentation, the perversion of truth. That's a different kind of anger. It is not a personal anger. It's what in the Christian tradition they call righteous anger. But righteous anger is still egoistic in that sense. There is also a particular quality which is what in the yoga is described as the bhava of the Rudra bhava, which is not an anger but a power that comes against falsehood to crush it. And that's a different kind of feeling. But it will not disrupt you. It will not distress you in this way. Just observe first, understand, and if you go back and see the story of it, it goes back many decades, perhaps many centuries. And at that point you realize, well, you were born in a framework where you were taught to trust those who are not trustworthy. So for you to break away, you can be thankful to the grace that you woke up. And then you don't need anger, rather you start thinking how to understand what's behind the scenes, what's actually happening, and the whole game changes. Yes. So there are other interesting comments. I will not go into those. So I have looked at the first disruptor, Elon Musk. The next disruptor that I'm going to take up is going to be closer to my home, at least in India. And this is Narendra Modi. And if you have trigger responses to the name, allow them to pass. I know many people who hate him. I know many people who love him. You don't have to like him. Look at the actions. And actions as regards who? Human evolution. And then to that extent, what's good for India. You can associate him with many things which the media has accused him of, or you may begin to question whether those accusations are actually true. I leave that. That's not important for me. What I'm going to show is a certain pattern. And the pattern is this. When India became free, the people who took over the administration of India were trained by the British. All of them, no exception. All of them had some degree. If they were speaking English, well, they had some degree of exposure to British education. Some had actually been trained in England and come back from there. Others had been trained in British-run schools in India and therefore had the fluency of the language and then got into certain positions of power, etc. But you must understand that that training was designed to enslave. So they came up with the position of mind where the mind was already enslaved but thought itself free and yet worked within the framework of the colonized. Nehru, and I've mentioned this a couple of times before, actually considered himself an Englishman when he was in an interview with Kenneth Galbraith, the US ambassador. Kenneth Galbraith writes in his memoirs, Nehru leaned over in a conspiratorial whisper and said, "You know, I am the last Englishman to rule India." So he considered himself an Englishman. He considered his role as ruling. Now you have to understand the entire group that was around him had this same mentality. They were rulers. It was also the age of kings, remember. So they considered themselves now wannabe kings. So as a king, what do? You rule over your subjects. That's what the language of English language teaches you. If the language for kingdom was serving your subjects, you would have been thinking differently. But when you say rule your subjects, the word rule has this sense of domination. And they all came with this ruling mentality. What is worse? People like Nehru as Prime Minister had absolutely no rooting in the Indian civilization or its traditions or its spirituality or its cultural values. That's why he considered himself an Englishman as superior to the Indian, because for him everything Indian was barbaric. His description of past of India describes the Vedic rishis as barbarians. They were so foolish, they were so stupid, they were so afraid. It was night, so they looked out for the sun. They didn't see the sun, so they started praying, "Oh sun, come up." And so when the sun rose, they said, "See, we have called the sun, we are so great." That's the stupidity that he has. He has no knowledge of what the Veda represents, and for anything else of that period or even later. And with this mentality, what would be the best thing he would do? Erase all that and bring all the best of the British values. Colonize further, because that's all he knows. Again, I'm not criticizing, blaming. I don't say you have to like him or hate him. It's irrelevant. Understand the mindset and understand the compulsions of the mindset. That's all that matters. See the actions and their results. And what are the drivers of those actions? He believed truly this was good for India. And then he came with the mentality which was at that time very fashionable, the communist, socialist mentality. So the government had to do everything for you. These poor people, they are not capable of anything. They are not capable of thinking. We have to give them the right thing. We have to program them to behave, to create an ideal society of controlled robots effectively. So he had these gigantic visions of gigantic factories where everybody was effectively slave labor, workers, and then the rulers, of course. And that's all he knew. That's all he was capable of. And so naturally everything he built was to further harden the colonial values and mindset and governance structures. But you must understand the entire structure of governance in India was built by colonials for not governance, for exploitation. So the most powerful man at the grassroots is the collector to this day. His job is to collect taxes. So when things go wrong, he goes and seizes your property and takes away money by force because you didn't pay the taxes to the British rulers. The entire structure is still designed for that, to seize and take, not to serve. So when the collector travels in a car, he has got this big spinning light and horn with very loud beeping, and you have a police escort perhaps separating the common people so that he can go straight without having to pause. What's this? The same British mentality. So when he gets up, he has 2 or 3 servants standing outside who will do whatever is required, stand, salute, bring him a glass of water. The same British mentality of whatever was the king's idea of a ruler. When Abdul Kalam became the president of India, he discovered to his horror that there was one man whose job it was to put slippers on his feet. I don't remember which year it is. Abdul Kalam would be, 2004 or so when he became president. He had one man whose only job was put slippers on the feet of the president, who would then stand, stick his leg forward, and this man would put the slippers on. And from the colonial time of the British rule, this had been going on till Abdul Kalam. And Abdul Kalam said, "No, thank you, I will put on my own shoes," and gave the man another job. This is just to tell you how much India has been under colonial suppression. The mentality had not gone. And the nature of the education system built under British rule, with British books, with British objectives, perpetuated itself. That has still not changed. And this is one of the criticisms I have of Modi. He's not done enough to change the education system. Yes, some changes, but not enough. We needed far greater, more radical changes. But what happened when Modi first came to power? This culture of rule and selling out of the country was endemic. Every politician lived for this. I know for a fact, this was in the government just before Modi, the finance minister was sinking the Indian rupee day to day. Everybody in this industry expected the rupee to rise because that was the situation, and every day the finance minister would delay and let the rupee sink and fall, while his son was sitting in a foreign bank playing against the Indian rupee to make money. This is the reality. They didn't care for India. They cared only for their personal pockets. They were, remember, the rulers to exploit people. That mentality was endemic. When Modi came to power, it was still endemic. He had to counter this, go against it, change the mentality at least in a group around him, overcoming it. And the entire media went against him. The bureaucracy went against him. His own party went against him because he was preventing them from making money. How did he come to power? This is the amazing part. Just as Elon Musk came to power by the strength of his, ability to wield wealth, Modi came to power by tremendous vitality, driven by an idealism. And so we have to look back at his story. Briefly, we'll touch upon this, and then perhaps next time I will go into more details about what happened when he came to power. Because when he came to power at the national level as a prime minister, India was on the brink of financial collapse. The global deep state had already put all its assets in place to sink the Indian economy. The person who was at that time the Reserve Bank governor had already announced there are so many billions of dollars worth, I will say, or rupees worth of non-performing assets in the banks. And he was ready to announce the seizure of those assets, which means suddenly all the banks would have crashed and collapsed. And all this was set in place. The process of dividing the country into so many different communities or castes had already been underway. It had now entered the army, and they had demanded for the army to create a census based on religion and caste. It was intended to destroy the army itself and its integrity, which is army as a national institution does not care for these things. It has to serve irrespective of these things. The moment you start doing a census and then start reservations based on the census, you have destroyed the integrity. All this had already begun in the previous years. The last step that was remaining was the sinking of the economy. And if you see the previous government just before, as the rupee was falling, as the economy was sinking, as the jobs and market production was going to China more and more, which they were enabling, same thing which happened under Obama at that time. This prime minister as well as the finance minister openly said, this is the nature of the global economy. There is nothing we can do about it. So Indian economy will sink with the global economy. That's all they said. We can do nothing. From the point Modi came to power, he reversed all these policies. Today we have something fascinating which you see as a result of the change, that as the global economy is sinking, India's economy is strengthening. And something fascinating happens when that takes place. All those who have invested elsewhere, when they see their value sinking and they see value in India rising, they start taking out money from there and pumping it into India. And this has just begun. If this is sustained, and if something has not come to sink the Indian markets or the Indian economy by other means, then in fact India's economy will shoot up rapidly, the stock market will shoot up rapidly, etc. It's going to happen. We're on the cusp of some major shifts. But if something comes in between and now takes over and prevents and reverses these policies, it will go radically the other way and sink with the world. The same thing happened with the food. While everywhere else, post-Ukraine war and post-lockdowns, the food prices have shot up. In India, they have not significantly, at least not yet. India is largely independent and buffered from the world's inflation. And it's entirely because of policies which have been handled by the, well, I will say Modi government. Maybe Modi personally does not have the competence for this. I don't know. Maybe he has. But he has with him people who have the competence, and he's enabling them, and this is what is important. So it's like Elon Musk. He does not need, he is a wonderful programmer, I'm sure, but he does not need to know metallurgy to build the best rockets. He has the best metallurgists, but directed to the goals for making the best rockets. And this is important. It's actually a lot of innovations that they created in the rockets, in the tanks, in the fuels. The full story is absolutely amazing, if ever it's written. He's actually done innovations and breakthroughs in every single part of the rocket engine and design and everything, communications. Similarly with Modi, there's an innovative process that is being enabled by people who are competent, by man who holds the vision and makes the competent people enabled to be able to fulfill those. And you will see the radical change in the last few years, particularly of India in global affairs in diplomacy. Where earlier Indian diplomats used to be sitting, and I know this because I have friends who were in the diplomatic circles who would tell me these stories. Say we had a diplomat, for example, in a country in Europe, they would be sitting there and the members of the other side, diplomats from the other side of the country would tell them, we want this, we want that, and they would say, okay, what do you want? Here, we'll give it to you. If they were asked, what about India's interest? Sorry, we are not capable. We are not strong enough. We are a weak country. We have to kowtow to whatever they demand for us. It stopped there. There was no attempt even to stand for your own interests. And all of them came back with large kitties of money made through such transactions of basically selling out the country. They all became wealthy. They all invested in huge properties and so on and lived cushy lives, put their children into the same rut tracks of making money selling the country. All this was broken. And suddenly now, the same people, if they are willing, otherwise they're removed, are made to stand for India's interests. And in order to do that, he had to centralize the entire decision making of diplomacy so that they could not be hijacked on the surface. All of them got upset. All of them said Modi is a tyrant. But it was the only way to ensure that the interests were not sold out. When his own party members were throwing parties, which was a normal thing, which was the culture in Delhi, every member of parliament threw parties, and all the businessmen came and all the other dealers came, and there were exchanges and decisions being made, which were for the benefit of those businessmen or people, businesses. Modi's phone call would come from his office, not himself. The office phone call would say, Prime Minister does not want these parties, do your work instead. Show us results tomorrow. The entire Delhi culture of selling yourself, selling your country and having a good time at the expense of the country was reversed. A lot of people were very upset. But those who had good intentions said, finally, here's a chance where we can breathe higher values and do something worthwhile. And what is interesting is, he would set targets, and after a certain number of time, he would say, how far are you on the targets? Now, this is the first time a Prime Minister is actually pushing people, demanding targets to be announced in advance, ensuring a follow-up of the targets. And if they were not able to meet the targets, they would be thrown out, and somebody else would replace them. Very quickly, it came to a point where there were not enough IAS officers who were competent enough to do the work required to the standard that he demanded. And the result was he had to bypass them, and he created a framework in which people from the industry could be brought in and effectively run those programs. Why? For the good of the country. The easier way, and I've seen ministers, I've actually been inside one of these ministerial chambers, the minister is sitting watching television, taking no decision at all. Bureaucrats come with papers, they sign, it goes off. He doesn't even bother to read. The country is run by the bureaucrats who are again doing the same trade of wealth, of properties and country interests. Here are ministers now, and if they don't do their job of actually thinking and applying their mind, taking policies which are good for the country, they're thrown out straight away. Many of them were very upset. And this is a radical shift in India's governance for the very first time. When he became Prime Minister, the first thing he did, in his first lecture addressing the country, he said, I am not Prime Minister, I am Prime Servant of the people. Remember that mentality? I said Nehru's mentality of ruling the people. He said, I am servant of the people. Shift in mentality. Now again, I don't care what people say. Do you put it in practice? Look at the actions. When in this case, he actually did it. When he came to power, 2014 again, the entire media said he will never come to power. The media was against him. The propaganda was so strong against him. He was called all kinds of nasty things. He was called the butcher of Gujarat and all kinds of things. The second time when he was going to come, the second election which he won, 2019 or 20. At that time, again, all the media ganged up against him saying he will lose, he will lose. And the US, I think it was the Times, had a front page article, Modi, the great divider of India. So the whole media wanted him to sink. And you have to understand now why, all the discussions we have had, declaring him great divider. And the idea was, and this is what the media actually believes they have the power, if they say it long enough, everyone will believe it and live by it. So this is why they play with all these polls. Every poll is manipulated. And there are subtle ways of doing the manipulation. And I give you an example of how it's done. All these years in India, the polls always asked you, not who will you vote for. They will ask you, who do you think will win the election? Why? It's very interesting psychology there. So the media creates a big story, noise. X will believe, X will win, Y will lose. Now you may want to vote for Y. You may think Y will win, but the media makes such a loud noise that X will win. You are asked, who do you think will win? You say, well, I think X will win because that's what I've been told by the media. That goes as your poll result as who supports whom. Now, it's not who you support, it's who you think will win. You understand? So it's done very subtly, and there are many other ways. It depends who you ask. So they have actually lists. And when they find somebody consistently giving answers which are contrary to their interest, they drop them from the list, replaced by someone else. So you have actually a managed list to get the results that you want. So the result is every poll is at least off by minimum 10 to 20%. So when Modi actually came to power both times, the polls said it's touch and go. Both times he comes with an overwhelming majority and difference of 20-30%. That means all the polls were lying to you by at least 20%. And this tells you how nasty, how manipulative the media is, or the powers behind which control the media. You cannot trust them. And the games they play are very subtle, very complex. You may not see through them also. And it's done in many different ways. For example, here in the ashram, because there was a strong chance that the BJP would win in Pondicherry, the people they had tied up with, some other local thing, one person went around all over the ashram saying, be careful, don't vote for X, because they have already announced in a public meeting that if they come to power, they will take over the ashram and take over all its assets. And just 2 days before the polls, this story went around like crazy, wildfire, among all the people in the ashram. So the people who went to vote, I actually had people in the line who were saying, be very careful, don't vote for that one. Because I said, why? Because they're going to take over all the ashram properties. I said, who can take over all ashram properties? Isn't there a law of the land in which we live? Who can do that arbitrarily? And it's all fake. And then I found out who it was, and I found out the people who were made to be the agents for those interests. But there's a lot of manipulation that takes place on all these levels. Just to say that do not trust the media, even when it comes to Modi. We'll look at certain aspects of Modi's work before. What happened? What did he do in Gujarat? What did he do before that? Because there's always a track record. As you see with Elon Musk also, there's a track record. You don't suddenly come forward and make disruptive change. There's a pattern behind. And what are the driving forces for that pattern? What are the motivations, etc.? We'll look at some of that. And again, you don't have to like the man. You can hate him all you want. It's not important. Look at the actions, whether the actions serve a greater future for humanity and for India in this context. And that's all that will matter. Set aside your emotional likes and dislikes. Set aside any visceral or emotional reactions you have. Treat them as media programming. Educate yourself on the facts. Go deeper into the facts. And I can tell you, I have friends who criticize him every day. But on these points, when I state these facts, they will say, yes, but that does not count. It's this which counts. Okay, that's your choice. But then you cannot ignore that. You have to look at the full picture. So this is the second person I'm saying, because if he had not come in 2014, India would have been sunk the way Argentina today is sunk as an economy. We were that close to collapse. And the same thing which happened in 2016 when Trump came to power, the US armies were sinking. They did not have equipment. The planes were crashing. Ships were breaking. India's army was on the brink with insufficient weaponry, insufficient clothing, and there was large-scale demoralization, which was intentional, as I've suggested earlier. All this was reversed from beginning 2014 onwards. So there are many elements to this which I want to touch upon, but if not for that, India would have easily lost 20 to 30 years. It could not be allowed to happen. I did feel, and a lot of us felt here, that there was a spiritual intervention that took place in the 2014 elections, not in the later one, but there was an intervention, there was a force that came and swung the whole the mood of the nation was swung by an intervention from above, which saved India. It was the single most decisive intervention that took place on a collective level in the last few decades. After that, it's a different story. What happens next, we will see. But we have to understand what was at stake, and I've touched on a few points. We'll touch on a few more next time. I'll continue on this and we'll possibly take up the third name in the sequence. And each of these, you will see how disruptive they have been. And I'll pause here for today with a recapitulation, and also before closing to say that for the next 4 weeks, we won't have the live sessions because unfortunately I'll be occupied with something else and I'll be traveling. So instead we will put up some video recordings of talks which I gave earlier this year in July, and 4 talks. Of these, the first one is more like a general introduction to the theme of that conference, but the 3 after that are an introduction to Sri Aurobindo. I would consider these to be extremely important. For me personally, they were extremely important. They came because there was a request for a short introduction to Sri Aurobindo, his thought and his work and so on. And they were given as part of that, and I think you will enjoy them very much. So I would highly encourage you to watch those. We will put them up at the same time on Saturday evenings. So, and we will resume this from November 11th, Saturday the 11th, the live sessions. So looking back, in summary, I want to remind us of a few things. There's something very important happening in the world. There's a cabal-directed global revolution to build a one-world government. And there is a wall, literally, of controls which have been put in place so thick, so rigid, that actually it was difficult to see any hope. If anything, one could cut through narrow gaps which would be immediately closed. And somehow in the last few years, there have been some major disruptive focal points which have as if punched holes into this wall. And it's almost as if now an opportunity exists for humanity to cut through, to pass through this barrier and come out with a freer possibility, avoiding the danger of the one world government, even if momentarily in some parts it seems to actually be realized, but overall humanity might still avoid that. The timeline is actually of the next 5 to 10 years, which are the most critical. But of those 5 years, even for those 5 or 10 years to be able to do something to cut through the passage, the next 1.5 years are the most critical. If we miss this opportunity, I'm saying this is my personal opinion based on all that what I consider to be. If we miss this opportunity, it will be a long night of struggle. Because once those systems come in place, the grip that they have, and you will see this in many parts of the world, it takes 10 years, 15 years longer to be able to break out of it. And if it's global in scope, the opportunities would be very few. Fortunately, these disruptors are already in place. They have already disrupted many things. Now we can actually see passages which allow us to pass through and even open out and glimpses of a light, even if the passage is of 5 or 10 years, but at least we can see and there is hope. There's an opportunity now for open discussion, open sharing, and it's happening. And it's happening because of divine intervention, not because of efforts we have made. Some of these individuals are disruptors powered by divine inspiration, even if they're not conscious of it, as many vibhutis are not conscious. But they are backed by a power which makes them capable of some gigantic possibilities in their work, irrespective of. The point is, we see the action, you see the results, and there's an opportunity here before us. We as individuals who are not capable of all that, we're not capable of things these people are doing, but what we are capable of is in our space to become centers of light. And that's what we have to focus on, each one of us, in the space given, in the work given, in the relationships we have, in the ideals we hold, in the efforts we make, in the loyalty that we keep, and the faith in the divine. This we should cling to and invoke, literally become a focal point for the light to fill us and reflect or flow in the world. This is the minimum that all of us can do. If you can do more, all the better. And you have some wonderful examples in front of you. You don't have, we may not all be capable of that, but a little bit of it, 100th or 1,000th of it, we can take small steps and begin to make disruptive changes in our lives around us. Let's all hold in aspiration, at the very least in prayer, for this to be true and to be realized in our lifetimes. Namaste.
Namaste.
Start me.